Let's get started. Okay. All right. So we spent the first few weeks kind of going over points 1 to 3 here, if you recall. We talked about truth. We talked about is truth knowable. We talked about types of truth. We talked about the nature of truth. We talked about logic. Why we have to use logic to know anything. Then we did a couple weeks in talking about God's existence, because if God doesn't exist, then obviously miracles are not possible. But if God exists, miracles are certainly possible, as we will see. So what you do is you start. It's like Lewis says here. If God exists, obviously the miracles are on the table because God is by definition outside of the world of nature. So that's why we try to build a case for God existing first, and that makes it more. It creates the understanding that, okay, well, if God exists, and obviously he can do miracles, and miracles are more easier to accept. You know what I mean? They just make a lot more sense, of course, if you build a case for God's existence. So that is why our approach, we kind of started outside the Bible, right? The first couple of weeks, we didn't really get into the Bible a whole lot. We talked about some reasons to believe in God without using the Bible necessarily. And tonight we'll talk a little bit about things in the Bible, a little more, because now we're getting into history. Because once again, if God exists, you need to ask, has he spoken somewhere in history? Has he done something in history? Okay, because, just like you guys form relationships with other people, you probably know you didn't form any relationships without communication. You had to talk, you had to email, you had to spend time with the person. You spent time revealing yourself to that person, and that person revealed himself to you, and that's how that relationship was formed. They gave knowledge of themselves to you, right? And that's what God has to do in order for us to know what he wants for us and what his plans for us are. He's going to have to speak, and that means he's going to have to do something to communicate what he wants for us, okay? And that's why we believe that he does miracles. That's why he intervenes into human history to show what he expects of us, okay? If he didn't do that, we wouldn't know anything, right? He has to do something, okay? So it's interesting, back in a survey in 2008, believe it or not, a lot of people do believe in miracles. It's not, people are so skeptical of miracles. Not necessarily. It said here is people that are 45 and over, 80% believe in miracles, 41% believe that they occur every day, and 37% claim they've witnessed at least one. 85% of women believe, 73% of men believe, or are more inclined to believe. 86% of people with high school diplomas believe, 71% with college degrees believe. So that was in an article called Miracles, Divine Healings, and Angels, Beliefs Among U.S. Adults 45 and Over. That was back in 2008, so that was a long time ago. But, this is 2023. I don't know how much it's changed, but we'd have to see. But then we have guys like the ever so skeptical Richard Dawkins, who's been probably the most staunch atheist the last 30 years we've ever had, the most what we call evangelistic atheist. And, he makes this kind of snarky comment. Of course, he's not right here. He says, the 19th century is the last time when it's possible for an educated person to admit to believing in miracles like the virgin birth without embarrassment. When pressed, many educated Christians, they are too loyal to deny the virgin birth and resurrection, but it embarrasses them to know their rational minds know it is absurd. So they would rather not be asked. He's absolutely wrong, because I'd be more than happy to have any atheist ask me why I believe in the virgin birth and the resurrection. I'll be happy to take on that discussion. But, he's just in his world of atheism. He just thinks it's silly to believe in anything outside the world of nature. There's been a lot of work actually in academic circles on the work of miracles. There's been philosophical work and historical work. Like one of my professors, Norm Geisler, he wrote a book years ago up in the corner here called Miracles in the Modern Mind, The Defense of Biblical Miracles, kind of an introduction. He wrote that a long time ago. He's passed away now, but he wrote only like 65 books, I think, or something like that. So he wrote more than I'll ever even read in my life. But That's a good introduction. Then the book in Defense of Miracles is a good book. All these books are good. Craig Keener's 2-volume set on miracles there, that red cover there. Those are really good books. He's a New Testament scholar, teaches at Asbury with that 2-volume set down there. So there's a lot of work out there that's been done on the topic of miracles. A few more here. If you like the case for, if you ever read Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, he wrote a book called The Case for Miracles. You know, he always has those books called The Case for Faith, The Case for Creator, The Case for Christ, The Case for Miracles. So that's a good book. And then some of these other ones here. So been a lot of work written on this topic, no doubt about it, which is good. We need these resources out there. Definitely need them. It certainly doesn't hurt. 2 more books that came out over the last 3 years were J.P. Moreland's book. He's a top Christian philosopher, and he just wanted to talk about how he'd seen God intervene in his life, some of the miracles he had seen, as well as some of the evidence for miracles. And then Craig Keener wrote like a simpler book called Miracles Today. So, you know, there's a lot of work out there if you want to go deeper. You know, if you want to go deeper on this topic, there's plenty to study, okay? All right. You know, some people hear the word miracles, obviously that assumes something supernatural, of course. You know, some people who may be kind of skeptical of it may think that involves things like superstition, you know, like, oh, that stuff, believing in ghosts and fairies and all that stuff, that's just part of the world of miracles and weird stuff, all that supernatural stuff. Or some people believed in Zeus and Thor and the gods, you know, the Greek gods and all that stuff. And they think all this stuff kind of goes together. It's one big package. It's amazing how many movies that still get made off the gods, like Zeus and those gods. So many. I just watched Wonder Woman again like a couple weeks ago. It all had Zeus and all those gods in them. But, you know, some people just sometimes say, you know, how can you believe in these weird things? You know, I mean, don't you believe kind of like the natural world is all there is? I mean, you believe in all this stuff. So for some people, that's what it kind of, this comes to mind when they hear the word miracles. Not everybody, but some people, okay? And then, of course, you know, some people would say, well, you know, you wouldn't believe it if you know, someone told you you saw flying pigs in your backyard. You'd probably look at them like they're crazy, right? Like that would be a miracle claim, right? I mean, be like, that is something that is out of the ordinary. That is something that is so bizarre and so strange and so out of the ordinary that I couldn't believe such a thing. And let's be honest, if someone came to you and said they saw pigs flying in their backyard, you'd probably be like, no way. You'd be like, let me go see that right now. Give me some evidence, right? Of course you would. I mean, it's just not a common event, right? It's weird. But, you know, the Bible definitely, you know, presents, there's a gap. You know, the things in the Bible, there's a lot of supernatural events in the Bible, a lot of incredible things. You know, the parting of the Red Sea, you know, the assumption or the ascension, Jesus going up in the sky, the virgin birth, Elijah being taken up, talking donkeys. You know, you got a talking donkey there. You have all kinds of miracles in the book of Acts. Of course, you have Jesus's miracles. You have things that are just not the way most people think the natural order works. That's why they're called miracles, by the way. And so there's all kinds of supernatural realities in the Bible. Of course, anybody who reads the Bible knows it's a supernatural book, right? So there's always been a struggle sometimes to bridge that gap between the Bible world and our world. Now, like Keener wrote about back here, Craig Keener, this guy on the right, you know, he documents all kinds of things across the world where miracles are still happening. Like he has documentation of this stuff, and he shows that God's still doing a lot of supernatural things all over the world. We may not see him as much in the United States, but he talks about certain events and certain documentation of things all over the world. So there's still things happening today, but it just, for some people, you know, they read the Bible the first time like, whoa, this is really different. I mean, this is certainly not the kind of thing we see on a regular basis. You know, and some people, I've noticed over the years, when you witness to them about Jesus, you may have noticed this yourself, sometimes they really just like to kind of fall into this kind of camp, you know, where they say like, well, I like the teachings and ethics of Jesus, but I don't believe in those miracles. You know, I'm not sure about the walking on the water and feeding of the 5,000. I don't know about that stuff. Or he might say, well, the miracles are just symbolic. They're not literal. They're just like ways to get hope and meaning, but they didn't really happen, right? Or like a rabbi said to me in an event we did years ago. We did a discussion on our different beliefs, and he said, it doesn't really matter whether the Exodus happened, whether the Jewish people really were delivered through the parting of the Red Sea and God delivered them out of Egypt through all those miracles. All that matters is we know slavery is wrong. What matters is a lesson, and so someone could come along and in a similar vein and say, well, it doesn't really matter if the resurrection really happened. All that matters, we get the lesson from it, which is hope. And so that's sad, because the biblical authors don't really make that dichotomy. They don't really try to come across like, well, I just want you to have the lesson of the story, but no, they really believe these events happen. Of course they did. So you don't need to make that dichotomy, right? That's what some people do. So, it's been a challenge to kind of define a miracle. In some camps, trying to get a clear definition. Craig Keener says here in his book, he says there's no universally agreed on definition, but probably the most useful one with abundant historical warrant is a special divine action, although that definition may require some defining itself. He's right. There hasn't been a universally agreed on definition. Different definitions have been offered. Like Robert Kuhn here says, Robert Kuhn here, he says, a miracle is an event specifically willed by God with the intention of demonstrating its divine authorship as an instrument of divine revelation. It's not violating a law of nature. That's kind of a technical definition. I kind of like my definition by my friend here, Mike Lacona. I like this definition. He says here, I define miracle as an event in history for which natural explanations are inadequate and proposed that we may identify a miracle when the event is highly unlikely to have occurred given the circumstances or natural law, and occurred in an environment context charged with religious significance. So, what's really important is you have to understand a miracle needs a context. You need like a historical religious context for it. So if someone comes along and says, well, you believe in those supernatural things, like, do you believe like in Bigfoot, or do you believe in UFOs, or do you believe in the Loch Ness Monster, all that supposedly weird stuff? I don't really have any kind of historical context for any of those things. I do have an historical context for the life of Jesus, though, and what's in the Bible. Of course, there's entire context for it, okay? But it generally is something that's done, like I said, there has to be a historical religious context to it. Erwin Lutzer, who was the pastor of Moody Church for years. I used to go listen to him preach when I lived in Chicago. I just drive in there Sunday nights and sit in the back and listen to, because I loved his voice. He's retired now, but he said, a popular but wrong definition is to say that a miracle is a point in time which God intervenes in the world. That definition fails for one good reason. It gives the false impression that God only occasionally intervenes in the world. A miracle happens when God, who is continuously active in the world, breaks his usual pattern, does something extraordinary. I kind of like that too, because, God is always involved in the world all the time. It's just that sometimes he does something very, very specific to get our attention. It's like we need to wake up when he's doing something like a resurrection or something like that. Lewis said, when it came to define a miracle, he said, I use the word miracle to mean an interference with nature by a supernatural force. It's kind of a basic definition he gave. Now, let's talk about some other ways people maybe misunderstand what miracles are. For all you long-suffering Cleveland Brown fans, like my wife who's from Cleveland, the Browns winning the Super Bowl, someone would say, well, that's a miracle. I mean, that's never happened before, right? It's a rare event. Yeah, it's a rare event, but, it doesn't have, the Cleveland Browns winning the Super Bowl doesn't have any kind of theological significance, okay? There's no real, is God using the Cleveland Browns winning the Super Bowl to get his attention about Jesus? Is he using it to draw people to Jesus through the Browns winning the Super Bowl, or trying to get their attention about their spiritual lives? I don't think so. I think the Browns winning the Super Bowl would probably give a lot of people an excuse to go out and get drunk and party and just have, celebrate, right? So that's not really a miracle. Or, some people think like a baby being born is a miracle. And it's no doubt, when you watch the birth of your child, it is an amazing thing. It is absolutely incredible. God has to be behind the process, the reproductive process, and the process of a birth. I mean, it's amazing. But it's not really like a rare event, because babies are born all the time. They're born every day, so it's not like a one-time event. It's they do happen quite frequently. Some of the things that people also get confused on, maybe they think like an anomaly. You guys ever heard of anomaly? It's like a freak of nature where something happens that's very rare. Like, oh, that's an anomaly in nature. I've never seen that. Like if I say Michael Jordan is an anomaly in basketball, he's just, no one's ever been like him. I mean, he's amazing. He's one of the most incredible basketball players to ever play. We could say he's like an anomaly. Sometimes you might say that he's a rare basketball player or something, right? Sometimes people use it in like that context, right? Some people may think miracles are the same as magic. They're not the same thing as magic. Okay, magic is not a miracle. That is a deception. And it's controlled by man, and it's not even supernatural, okay, at all. Some people may think of miracles like a psychosomatic thing, something like mind over matter, some sort of psychological thing. That's not really what a miracle is. It's not controlled by your psychology. And then, of course, in the Bible, Satan is, of course, tries to counterfeit what God does in his own miracles. But, of course, those things don't bring any glory to God. And, they're related to the occult. And then we have providence. Sometimes people think when providence happens in their life, maybe that's a miracle. Like if I need $20 today, I'm walking through Ohio State campus and I see a $20 bill in the classroom as I'm walking around. Is that a miracle, or is that just providence? God provided that $20 in a providential way. Or, something like the fog at Normandy, or something like that. So that's not necessarily the same thing as a miracle. The far right column is really what a miracle is. It's whenever a miracle is done in the Bible, it's always done to bring glory to God. It's supposed to get people's attention. It's supposed to get them to commit their lives, right, to Jesus, whoever it is. When Jesus does the miracles, they're supposed to believe, right? They're supposed to submit their lives to him, not just supposed to run away and go, cool, it's a miracle. Can I see another one, Jesus? No, they're done to evoke a response of submission to God. They never fail. They're always immediate, and they're lasting. And so, there are some ways to define, describe a biblical miracle other than these categories. We'll talk about a little more. Those are the words that are used really when you look at the word, when miracle is used, it comes under these three categories: sign, wonder, and power. A lot of times, like when it says Jesus in Acts 2:22, it says Jesus was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs. Sometimes the word wonders is used there, like I said. So, those are generally the things, those three words you'll see that are involved a lot of times we're talking about miracles. Notice how Jesus, in the book of John, Nicodemus comes to him and says, teacher, you must be from God. You do these signs, God must be with you because we see these signs you do. That's where that word comes from, sign right there. And so, there is a specific context to the way miracles are done. Now, if you look in the Old Testament, a lot of times it's the same thing where Moses did miracles. It's always sign, wonder, kind of like sign, wonder, and power, the same thing. Moses does the signs, just like Jesus does. They both do signs. They're sign prophets. So you'll see kind of this pattern in the Old and New Testament. It's the same kind of thing. When you think about it, it is true that God working in your life every day, we kind of take that for granted. We see God working in us and people's lives around us. Maybe he answers our prayers. We kind of view that as kind of like something like the ordinary Christian life. we fall into that trap. Like, oh, there's nothing really extraordinary. This is just God's normal working in my life. You know what I mean? I pray, I see him answering prayer, I walk. I mean, I do my thing every day, and I see him sometimes work in my life, do other things in other people's lives, but we don't sometimes put him in our daily lives in the category of like extraordinary. Like in the middle of the slide here, like when the parting of the Red Sea is extraordinary, or the resurrection is an extraordinary thing, or the virgin birth is extraordinary, or maybe God healing someone is extraordinary, totally healing them of cancer or something. But, I think probably in the back of our minds, some of us don't really view it like our lives are defined by amazing, extraordinary things like those things, because those things are in the Bible, right? Those are these one-time big miracles that God does, right? Some people look for God everywhere. I mean, as you know, they look at even like a grilled cheese sandwich and think they see the face of Jesus, like a burned face of Jesus there, right? There's Jesus. He's on a grilled cheese sandwich. Isn't that cool? There he is, right there. All right. Not a good joke. You guys aren't getting it. Okay, you're not laughing. All right. Now, in the Bible with Jesus, there's no doubt that Jesus is known as an exorcist. No doubt about it. He is perceived as an exorcist and a healer. You guys probably know, you read the Gospels, he's doing a lot of healings and a lot of exorcisms, right? Many people are afflicted with leprosy. The leprosy rate was very high, so they're coming to Jesus for healing. And we know that there's a lot of people that are demon afflicted with a demonic presence, or else they're, the demons possess them, whatever it is, but Jesus definitely knows an exorcist as a healer. And, you think of the nature miracles Jesus did. Those are like the nature miracles when he feeds the 5,000. Or he changes like the natural realm, like when Peter's walking on the sea and Jesus is walking on the water. He's changing the natural environment to meet human needs, right? Those are what we call the nature miracles. And some people have a hard time believing those. I think personally, I think if you believe Jesus rose from the dead, these are child's play, right? And if God created the world, these are child's play for what God can do. But these are known as nature miracles, okay? And there's a whole book written on that called The Nature Miracles of Jesus, by the way. It's kind of a cool book. There's not a lot of doubt that most New Testament scholars believe Jesus was a miracle worker. It's not really debated that Jesus is viewed as someone who's doing miracles, doing healings, doing exorcisms. Because it's just all throughout the Gospels, all 4 Gospels, they're just filled with Jesus doing this stuff. All 4 different biographies written about Jesus that the early believers, the early people who wrote about Jesus, believed and perceived him as a miracle worker, a miracle working Messiah. It was prophesied in Isaiah that the Messiah would do miracles. It's not really surprising he did miracles, but not a lot of doubt that he's perceived as a miracle worker. Now, an alternative worldview that doesn't allow miracles is generally what we call like a naturalistic worldview, what we call physicalism, where people just believe that physical matter is all there is. There's nothing outside the physical realm. You're just a big glob of matter. Everything is natural. Nothing's ever violated. The natural world is all there is, and science can explain everything. A lot of people pick this up on college campuses. But I'm happy to say that after doing campus ministry for almost 20 years now, that I can tell you that a lot of people still believe in God on college campuses. Yes, there's agnostics and atheists and people of different religions, but still there are people there that still believe in a creator. It's not like totally secularized. But this is one worldview, and this kind of came about through the history of thought. You and I, as Christians, we probably are more in the pre-modern category over here, because we believe God is the starting point for knowing everything. And then you have the Enlightenment period that came along and started to bring science into it, and Darwinian evolution, and kind of begin to give God the boot. as far as out of the starting point for reality. And then you had postmodernism that came along, which is still here. That kind of reacted to modernism. That's why I have a lot of people that are kind of like spiritual but not religious. They believe in some sort of spirituality or higher power, or just like a force, kind of an impersonal force around them. Very pragmatic and pantheistic, kind of like whatever works for you works for you. If you want to be a Christian, be a Christian. I'll be a Hindu. A lot of that's going on today, no doubt. So some people just have been affected a lot by these worldviews, because worldviews are all around us. Now, everybody has a worldview. It's what you believe in your background. It's how you interpret reality, right? Some of us, I did a whole teaching on worldview before. Your worldview is formed by the way you're raised. It's impacted by your culture. It's impacted by your religious upbringing. It's impacted by study. It's impacted, hopefully, by your study of Christianity, because Christianity is a worldview, right? It's not just a belief in Jesus, we go to heaven when we die. It forms how we view reality. So our worldview definitely affects, though, how we view miracles, right? Some people, their worldview, they already take their worldview ahead of time into looking at miracles, and they prejudge it ahead of time. They say, well, my worldview back here is this one. I believe in only the physical realm and the natural realm, that all that exists is physical matter, and there are no things like gods or spirits or souls. So obviously I'm not going to have a view that allows miracles like this guy right here. I'll give you a couple examples. James Tabor teaches at University of North Carolina. See his worldview impacting how he views miracles. He says women do not get pregnant without a male ever. So Jesus had a human father. Dead bodies don't rise. So the tomb was empty. The historical conclusion is simple. Jesus' body was moved by someone likely reburied in other locations. So see how his worldview impacts how he views miracles, right? He doesn't allow miracles into his worldview. Okay, same with this guy right here. James Crossan, he said, John Crossan, he said, a person has the right to say, I believe that by faith, I believe God's intervened in the resurrection event. It's a theological presupposition of mine. God doesn't operate in that way. So see, he has a presupposition already ahead of time. He believes us in advance that God can't do miracles, right? So that's too bad. That's his worldview, taking it into the evidence, looking at the evidence. One of those popularizers out there today that's all over the internet and all over college campuses. If you take an introduction to New Testament or a class on New Testament or early Christianity, you're going to read Bart Ehrman's textbook, and he is one of the most popular skeptical writers out there. And he said that in his book, I have this book, the New Testament Historical Introduction to Early Christian Writings. He said a miracle by definition is the most improbable of all events. The probability of a miracle is so small or infinitesimally remote. He is an historian. He says, number 2, an historian can only establish what probably happened in the past. Number 3, therefore, an historian can never establish that a miracle happened. So, see, his whole worldview won't allow him to say history can record miracles. See how he's biased against it to begin with? So that's his worldview, right? His worldview won't allow it. Of course, there's answers to these things. I'm just saying it shows you how their worldview impacts what they believe. Some people think the science might be able to show the supernatural doesn't exist. That is incorrect. Because first of all, science by definition only studies the natural material world. It studies physical things, natural things. It looks for natural causes alone. It's very restrictive. God by definition already transcends the natural world. Just by definition, God already transcends the entire natural world. Now, we believe God can use natural events. He can use the world of nature for his purposes, right? He can use the ocean. He can use the sand. He can use animals. He can use our bodies. He can use anything in the world of nature for his purposes, right? He's behind the world of nature too, right? So that doesn't work. And so one guy that's interesting that really tried to get rid of the miracles in the Bible was Jefferson. He was he was reacting to the separation of church and state. He didn't want religion mingled in with the state, which he was kind of had the wrong definition about that. But he took his Bible and cut a lot of the miracles of Jesus out of his New Testament, because he was afraid that Christianity was going to be mingled in with the government. He wanted to keep those separate, but he ended up with kind of a deistic God, where he just definitely believed in a creator, and he kind of carved out the miracles of Jesus out of his Bible. And that obviously won't work because, as this gentleman says here, Jeffrey Russell, he says a non-miraculous Christianity is historically and philosophically not Christianity at all. Thomas Jefferson and other well-meaning people edited the Bible to take out the miracles. Let's explain the miracles away in pseudoscientific terms, but snipping miracles out of the Bible is like taking battles out of Beowulf or liberty out of the Declaration of Independence. So he's right. You really don't get the Christianity that is Christianity if you just get rid of the miracles. I mean, if you get rid of the miracles in the New Testament, Jesus is nothing but another moral or ethical teacher like Gandhi, right? He's really not that different. Okay. So the deal is that, as I said at the beginning, if God exists, if a personal theistic God exists, and miracles are on the table, and a miracle is definitely an act of God. God can't give us false miracles by definition, and who he is. He can't reveal himself in a false manner. He can't lie. He can't, give like a deceptive miracle. But every time in the Bible, where you really see God doing miracles is when he's trying to confirm new revelation. He's showing something he's doing in history that's different. Like he's doing something in history to reveal himself in a new way, something he's trying to show. And he does this in Israel's history. He starts out with Moses, when he raises up Moses. He does the miracles through Moses when he sends Moses to go talk to Pharaoh. Moses says, I don't know how they're going to believe me. How's he going to believe me? I'm just a man, and God says, you'll see, I'll be with you. And then he allows Moses to do these signs, right? That proves he's a prophet, right? He does those miracles to show he's a true prophet of God. And then you see in the prophetic period, you see Elijah and Elisha do some miracles there as well. In the prophetic period. And then, we really don't have much until the apostolic period when Jesus comes and he does his miracles. Of course, Jesus doing miracles is like God definitely revealing himself in a greater way to the world. He's got to confirm who Jesus is with miracles. Jesus can't just show up on the scene and say, I'm the Messiah, and not prove it. I mean, he's got to do some things to show he's got the credentials, right? You can't just walk around and say it, make the statement, yes, I'm the Messiah, I am here. No, he's got to do some things. Remember when in Matthew chapter 11, when John the Baptist is in prison, he's about to be beheaded, and he's really, he's already seen Jesus do these miracles. He saw Jesus baptized and all that stuff. Saw the Holy Spirit descend on Jesus. And then he's about to be beheaded and he's in prison, and he says, go and ask Jesus, are you the really expected one? Are you the Messiah? Because I'm struggling in my faith. I'm struggling. Are you really the expected one? He's having doubt. And what's Jesus say? He says, go and tell John, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the deaf hear, and the gospel is preached to the poor. He says, I do these miracles. The miracles show that I really am the Messiah. I'm here, John. I am really definitely the Messiah. Okay. So miracles play a huge role in God giving confirmation of the prophet. Jesus is a prophet like Moses. He's a greater Moses, right? He's not just Moses. He's a greater Moses. And he says the sign. Remember, he says in Matthew 12, this is a sign. You'll know who I am. The sign, of course, is the resurrection. And then Jesus is really the final prophet, the last prophet, and the ultimate prophet. And he confirms who he is by doing the signs as well. In the book of John, you keep reading, he does the signs, one after the other. It's sign, sign, sign. The wedding, just go through the book of John, you see all the signs he does, okay? All right. Okay, we talked about worldviews already. That's a repeat. Now, remember in the Bible, it's kind of interesting. The biblical authors don't really make a huge distinction between like supernatural and natural like we do today. They don't really do that. Like, oh, this is supernatural over here and that's natural over there. We do that today because of the Enlightenment period that caused that division there. But the biblical authors pretty much think God's behind everything. You know, he's behind the strong east wind blowing at night. You know, it says like the parting of the Red Sea was caused by a strong east wind. God, you know, is behind nature. He's the, as we say back here, he's the God is the primary cause of everything, but he also uses what we call secondary causes. He also uses the natural laws that he's created for his purposes. Okay, he can intervene in the world of nature. He's just behind the world of nature, but sometimes he injects a miracle in there, but he's already behind everything in nature anyway. It's not like he's like absent. You know, he just lets nature go off on its own without him being behind it at all. But sometimes he steps in and does a miracle. But they don't make that distinction in the Bible. It's kind of interesting. But definitely, like I said, biblical miracles are immediate. You know, they don't like, it's not like Jesus has to try and do a miracle over and over. Let me try again. I can't do it. God, I need help. Let me do another. I'm trying hard. Help me. No. Every time he does a miracle or healing, it's immediate. Okay. There's no stopping. There's no like waiting. You know, Jesus says to the blind man, you know, or the man at the well, whatever it is, you know, rise, take up your pallet and walk. You know, immediately the man became well. You know, or the blind man, you know, in John chapter 9. You know, he doesn't, just like Peter in Acts 3, even though Peter does that miracle through the power of Jesus in Acts 3, when the lame man's there, and, you know, Peter says, in the name of Jesus, walk. You know, that happened immediately in that case. But miracles, a lot of biblical miracles, like you'll read, they're all immediate. Okay, they happen very quickly and not a lot of waiting time. Definitely biblical miracles, when they're done in the Bible, they're never done for entertainment. So, you know, you notice how Jesus is having a problem that he's doing these miracles and people are following him around. The crowds are following him. They want more miracles. You notice that? They kind of follow him around from town to town. And after a while, you know, at one point he's like, no miracles are going to happen in this town. And sometimes, you know, I think we see Jesus begins to realize some of them really don't want another miracle, or they don't want Jesus. They just want the miracles. They want to see the signs, right? And Jesus is like, enough is enough. Do you want me, or just want what I can give you? Do you want the miracles, or do you want me? Like he says, I am the bread of life. Feed on me. He doesn't say, you know, he says, you just want more bread. So you just want more signs and more miracles. Like feed, I am the bread of life, right? So kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but miracles definitely are only done to glorify God. They're done for the glory of God. They also have a moral dimension. They're supposed to bring glory to God's moral character. Okay. Let's look at a few more objections to miracles. Been out for a while. One of them is that, you know, miracles are extraordinary claims. You know, they're not ordinary, like I said. So, you know, some people might, this is a quote. Carl Sagan came up with this. You know who Carl Sagan is. He did that documentary on the cosmos. Remember Cosmos? He said the cosmos is all there is ever. They will all there'll ever be, all that is, and all there ever be. He didn't believe in God. He's a staunch atheist. But, you know, he said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So the argument goes like this. Let's take like the resurrection of Jesus. Like someone comes along to you and says, well, the resurrection, that's an extraordinary claim. I mean, that is not an ordinary claim. And to be honest, they're right. It's not an ordinary claim. We don't expect it to be. But, you know, they say, well, you know, you need to have extraordinary evidence for that kind of claim. Well, as I always say to them, well, what would count as extraordinary evidence? Like, what would you count as evidence for the resurrection? Because I find with people that say this, no evidence would ever really convince them Jesus rose from the dead. Nothing's going to convince them. A friend of mine debated someone once on a college campus, and he asked the guy who's debating, he said, what would convince you Jesus rose from the dead? The guy said, well, I'd have to see like a 40-foot Jesus right in front of me. You know, so, you know, at that point, it just gets ridiculous. So you have to get them to define what they mean by extraordinary evidence if they bring that up. Like, what kind of evidence are you talking about? Like, what would convince you? I do find as I fix my slide here on the spot. Isn't that professional? But this is not where that's supposed to be. So let's put that up here. Extraordinary claim. Okay, guys, just show me some grace here. Let's go back to that. Okay, so I kind of find this to be an extraordinary claim. If someone believes this is an extraordinary claim for me, to believe that you as a human are the result of the laws of physics, time chance, plus randomness, plus accidents, plus luck, plus 3.5 billion years. This is what they teach sometimes on college campuses. This is a more reduced version. So they say, like, the laws of physics for our present universe arose by chance from a possible of many other universes. The first forms of life developed by chance, arising from primordial soup combinations that resulted from the laws of physics plus accidents. The first concept of life developed purely by chance through genetic mutations, environmental randomness, and humans evolved by more improbable occurrences. Well, I think personally that's an extraordinary claim to believe something like that. So I need good evidence for that. If that's what someone believes, and I just tell them, you need to give me really good evidence for that, because that is an extraordinary claim. Okay. Obviously, when it comes to Jesus's resurrection, I'll do the resurrection in a couple of weeks, but there have been people over the years, over the decades, over the centuries that have tried to come up with naturalistic explanations to Jesus's resurrection. We've been answering these for about 2,000 years. We talk like a natural inference, like the inference from the data we have. They try to come up with these natural explanations instead of like a supernatural explanation, like the one on the far right, the bodily resurrection. So we can answer these, obviously, but these are all what we call them like the naturalistic explanations, the non-supernatural explanations, right? But, we have been answering these. I'll talk more about these when we do the resurrection. No worry. As I said, miracles are not anomalies of nature, not the same thing. Miracles are not naturally repeatable. Anomalies are predictable. For example, the flight of a bumblebee was an anomaly for many years, but since it started to occur regularly, it was predictable even before it was explainable. And also anomalies don't have really theological, moral, or what we call teleological dimension. There's no really religious historical context to them. So I don't really, just remember, anomalies are not necessarily the same thing as miracles, okay? A little more information about magic. As I said, miracles are not the same thing as magic. Magic tricks involve deception. Miracles involve no deception by God. God doesn't do miracles to deceive. Magic has a purely natural explanation. Miracles do not. A miracle is under God's control. Magic is under human control, right? Those are humans that are manipulating things to make it look like something supernatural is happening, but it's not supernatural. Remember that if you believe in creation, that is the first miracle. Okay, if you take like William Lane Craig, who said he's one of the most famous Christian apologists of the last 50 years, but I had him here at Ohio State. And, he said when he first explored Christianity when he was very young, he remembers that he had a struggle believing in the virgin birth. The virgin birth was hard to believe. He thought, who could believe something like that? That's just it's so hard to believe. I mean, a woman impregnated supernaturally by God, right? But then he said, when I started to think about God who created the entire universe, and he started studying the cosmology and the evidence behind the universe, he said, well, heck, if God created the universe out of nothing, then believing a woman was virgin born is like child's play, right? So he had no problem after he got the creation thing under wraps. Once you believe that God, the beginning point of the universe, the starting point where science started at, which is the beginning point of the universe, and all time, space, and matter came into existence at that beginning point. If you can believe there's a cause outside of that, which is God that caused that, then any other miracle should be on the table, right? If God can do that, creating something from nothing. Paul Davies, he actually teaches at Arizona State. He's a physicist. He's not really a Christian, but I think I said this a few weeks ago, he wrote this article a long time ago in the New York Times. You can read it. He got totally scolded by atheists for saying this. He said, clearly then, both religion and science are founded on faith. And this guy's a physicist, by the way. He says, clearly then, both science and religion are founded on faith, nearly on belief in the existence of something outside the universe, like an unexplained God, or an unexplained set of physical laws, maybe even a huge ensemble of universes too. For that reason, both the monotheistic religion and orthodox science fail to provide a complete account of physical existence. So he got really scolded for that because he kind of put science and faith on the same wavelength. And, people don't like to hear that. But what he's saying is, back here, you have the beginning of the universe, you have all these laws coming into existence. These natural laws allow us to do science. He's like, where do those come from? Where do those come from? That allows us to even do science. Where do these laws come from? And why they set up so precisely the way they are for us to do our science? He's basically saying, do we have an explanation for that? Or we just take them for granted and do our science? He's like, science starts with faith as well. You don't know where those laws come from. Religion says they come from God, but science says, oh, we don't know. We just use them for our science. But he's like, you're starting off on faith as well. That's what he's saying. Both in the same place. David Hume said that he gave an argument. When we talk about Hume, let me go forward here. David Hume was a famous Scottish philosopher who had a lot of time to think, but he wrote a book, a couple books that talked about arguments against miracles. And his really arguments against miracles have been used forever. People keep using them. People repeat them. Some of the arguments I've heard against miracles, people are repeating it without even knowing it. So his writings have continued on for centuries, but he had some really bad arguments, honestly. This argument right here is really a bad argument because he said here, natural law by definition is a description of a regular occurrence, things that happen regularly, right? Regular events. And then he said, number two, a miracle is a rare occurrence, which it is. It's a rare thing, doesn't happen all the time. Then he said, number three, the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare, meaning that regular events always have better evidence than rare events. Then he says, number four, a wise man always bases his evidence on the greater evidence. Therefore, wise men shouldn't believe in miracles. Well, that's really silly because the evidence for the greater is not always, or if the evidence for the regular is not always greater than the evidence for the rare, because you're always, history is filled with rare events. You guys notice that? There's a lot of one-time rare, unrepeatable event. One of them is the beginning of the universe. That's not repeatable. One of them is how life began on Earth. That's a rare one-time event. There's a lot of historical events that have happened that are not repeatable in history, right? They're in the past. They're one-time events, which we have good evidence for. So it's just a really silly argument to just say we only accept evidence for regular events, not rare events. That doesn't make any sense, really. And then he also said that you can't trust the witnesses. If you have witnesses to a miracle, you can't trust the witnesses. He said they're probably deluded or they're lying. Just because he doesn't believe in miracles, he thinks that people can't record or write about miracles. So they must be deluded because he's so against miracles. But if you're going to say someone lied about miracles like the disciples, you're going to have a motive for them lying. Okay, people lie with motivations. Usually most people lie for money, sexual gain, and power, right? Those are the three main motivations. You can test witnesses. You can test their character. And we can test the witnesses of the New Testament, whether they were lying. And as far as we can see, we don't see any places where they got any kind of money or sexual gain or power from proclaiming Jesus rose from the dead. If anything, they got the opposite. If you guys read the New Testament, it speaks a lot against sexual immorality, right? You know that the disciples didn't get any power. They didn't start like giant religious institutions in the first century. They didn't have first, who's up for the power grab? Paul was persecuted. He was stoned, shipwrecked. Some of them got martyred, of course. And they really didn't get any financial gain. A lot of them were fishermen. Fishing business was pretty lucrative, believe it or not, in that time period. But they left that business behind to follow Jesus. So not a lot of motives for them to lie. Okay. And then we had this guy here. He lived a long time ago, but his basic argument was that if we don't see resurrections or miracles in the present, like right now, they didn't happen in the past. So his argument would be like, we don't see people rising from the dead today. How do you know that happened in the past? Well, that's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument, because you know that if you saw Uncle Johnny and Grandpa Billy rising from the dead, and we had all kinds of people rising from the dead today, then Jesus's resurrection would not be unique at all. It'd just be like another miracle, right? Oh, everyone's rising from the dead today, so Jesus is just another one who rose from the dead. No, that's why Jesus's resurrection is unique. And that's why it is a miracle. It's an unrepeatable one-time event for a very special purpose of God. Okay, that's why it is unique. And that's why it's not repeatable. And that's why people are not rising from the dead today and never dying again like Jesus. Okay, it's true, people can be resuscitated today, but they die again. Okay, Jesus came back to life and he never died again, right? He went to be with God. He's not like Lazarus. Lazarus died again, right? After he raised Lazarus from the dead, Lazarus went off to die again. So, that's not a good argument at all. Just because they don't happen today doesn't mean they didn't happen in the past. That doesn't really work at all. Now, some people may say today, why won't God show me a sign? He did these big miracle events in history. Like my dad once said to me, he's like, I don't understand. He did these giant miracles 2,000 years ago. Why doesn't he do like a huge miracle today to get people's attention, And I'm like, Dad, perhaps God's giving you enough evidence as it was, and you're not paying attention to the miracle he did then. So why do you need to, what makes you so sure you'll pay attention now? You've already rejected the giant miracles he did. You don't believe in them. So how do you know a new one today is going to get your attention? And when people say that they want a sign of some kind, I think God owes them a sign. There's no guarantee that that person's going to repent and accept Jesus and turn their life over to Jesus just because they get some sort of sign. And that's why I always say to people, perhaps God knows your heart better than you do, and he knows how you respond. There's no guarantee if he did something I used to have an atheist say to me, God knows what I need. He says he knows what I need to believe. He'd give it to me if he really wanted me to believe. I'm like, you've already rejected creation. You've rejected the miracle of creation. It's all around you. It's clear as day. You've rejected the miracle of Jesus. You've rejected the miracle of Israel. You've rejected all the history. So why does God owe you something else? He doesn't owe you anything. Okay. So there's no guarantee people are going to believe. When God does the miracles in the New Testament, like when the signs are done and Jesus or whoever is imparts knowledge of who God is, like this is supposed to show glory to God. There's supposed to be a response. The people respond. They're supposed to yield and turn their lives over and repent and turn to God, right? Or believe in Jesus. So miracles have a very special purpose. They're not designed, just like I said, for entertainment. There's a very specific purpose there, okay? So no guarantee if someone got some sort of sign or whatever they want today, they think they're owed a sign that they would come to believe or repent and believe. No guarantee that's going to happen, right? All right. Well, that's about it for miracles. We can have a discussion now.